Hello, my name is Frank White. I wish we were talking in a big room with lots of space to roam around in and shake hands and hug and revel in our shared humanity. But unfortunately, our narratives have been altered, interrupted by COVID-19, and that has changed everything. And undoubtedly will forever change some things, maybe change some things that needed to be changed. The story isn't finished yet. So we have some time, too much time, to contemplate how this global experience is going to impact our immediate future. As we educators share an anxiety about how the next few months are going to play out, I sit here in my Rona faux hawk and wonder how I'm going to teach my students this fall. I think it's fair to say that for me at least, the end of this past school year, March to early June, did not go well. It wasn't successful. I wasn't successful in making the transition to distance learning. My students suffered. I suffered. My shtick as a teacher is to walk into a room full of teenagers, take up the dripping brushes of our nation's history, and together we just get started creating a narrative, our nation's story. I haven't yet figured out how to do that from this chair, in this room, alone. I miss my students. I miss being good at being a teacher. I miss my classroom. I miss the thrill I've felt in my belly every year, about now, thinking about how the first scary day of school is going to go. I don't know how to feel about the coming school year, but I think dread is a part of it. And I've never had to include that in my feelings before. I'm a storyteller who acquaints high school students with the narrative of our state, our nation, our world, and ultimately, hopefully, helps them find a place for their own narratives in those places. I do this by helping them look at the narratives of others who found themselves caught up in the currents of history. I continually remind my students that we are living in someone else's history, that they are a part of historical narratives that will be examined by historians and students in the future. I encourage them to think of themselves as texts. I ask them, if someone was to tell the story of this part of your life, this part of your history, how would that go? I remind them that their lives are very much like the lives we study in history. I ask them, how would you want your story to be told? I realize when some hear storyteller or narrative, they might immediately conjure up associations with fiction and may be tempted to dismiss a storyteller's version of history. The acclaimed historian Michael Nyberg makes a distinction between history and memory. History being the events we choose to privilege and relating them to one another, thus committing them to a sort of collective memory that we call culture. Storytellers have for millennia taken history and mixed it with the long shadows cast by innumerable campfires, shaping it into a narrative, live and malleable, like our cognitive processes are live and malleable. Narrative takes us so much farther than cold recitations, mindless incantations, questions to answer at the end of the chapter. If you want your culture to endure, you're going to need a narrative that transcends history. You're going to want a narrative that makes room for new understandings, for history to make its way to memory. For that, you're going to need a good storyteller. In my practice, I introduce students to the fluidity of understanding history. There isn't a history well for me as their teacher to throw a bucket down to fill up their little sippy cups. Historians debate history. They frequently reach erroneous conclusions. We are continually backmapping, re-envisioning history. I tell them the history we're going to look at in my classes bears very little resemblance to the history I was taught when I was sitting in their place as a high school history student. Also, narrative. Suddenly, their ancient high school history teacher takes on a new identity. Students are reminded, or perhaps introduced for the first time, teenagers, you may have noticed, are notoriously present tense creatures, to the idea that their teachers were once subjected to the same tyrannies, the same ridiculous redundancies, the all too frequently pointless classroom exercises that we subject them to. The effect is noticeable if you're paying attention. Any decent classroom teacher will tell you that paying attention is essential to successfully engaging the teenage mind. And those mazy minds are drawn to tangent like lightning is drawn to spires. Eventually, teachers themselves can become akin to texts, known by many, sought out and appreciated by some, feared and loathed by others, plain old-fashioned boring to many. From a student's perspective, the subject of the class can take a back seat to the degree to which the instructional style of the teacher meshes with the learning style of students. Students don't always have the language to express their preferences. They will occasionally report that they like one teacher or don't like another teacher. These responses are frequently misread as representing popularity contests, commonly dismissed as providing a less rigorous learning environment or a less than professional pedagogical approach. Although I'm sure that these cases certainly do exist, it has been my experience that students enjoy being challenged, being included, being consulted, being honored for the experiences and skills that they bring to the educational process. They feel the same rush of self-esteem that adults do when they learn how to do a difficult thing well. Being aware of the narratives we contribute to in the classroom helps create a space for students to feel confident in contributing to classroom discussions, to developing their own awarenesses of the role narrative plays in constructing knowledge. It allows them to acknowledge the spaces between themselves and others in understanding the significance of historical events. It allows a space to move beyond history. Understandings like of good and bad. This approach introduces complexity and acknowledges the role of difference in creating understanding. In such an environment, students have the opportunity to accept someone else's understandings as a product of their unique narrative. Students come to understand that like Faulkner's shape to fill a lack or Darwin's suggestion that environment shapes the creatures inhabiting any climate, our perspectives are likewise shaped by our experiences. At its best, this understanding of the role personal narrative allows students to have a greater likelihood of understanding people who have different views from themselves as having different narratives from themselves. In this light, disagreement can be better understood and accepted. And understanding our nation, our world, our species could probably benefit from. Another way that narrative plays out in the classroom is over the course of a 9 or 10 month arc of a normal school year. Identity plays such a huge role in narrative. Is there an entity more capable of contempt than a high school sophomore? Can I get an amen from those of us who have witnessed the seemingly inevitable decline of the haughty second semester senior? These are narratives that, if well understood, can contribute to the creation of effective and fun learning spaces. I have begun, as have many of my colleagues, to acknowledge the role of personal narrative in creating opportunities and obstacles in the paths of our students. The narrative of one of my students forced me to reconsider my approach to the narrative I want to present in my classes. Julie regularly disrespected my narrative by dependably showing up about 10 minutes late to my first period AP US history class. The bell ringer had been rung out, the groups had received their documents and their instructions, along with undoubtedly some witty repartee from their teacher, and then Julie interrupts. I have to process her late pass. I either have to get her up to speed on the lessons myself, or introduce a little social sanction by asking her table mates to do it, thereby punishing them just for having her in their group. A lack of empathy on my part excused me from wondering how Julie's daily experience with me might be affecting her narrative. One day, maybe 6 weeks into the class, one of my students mentioned that Julie opened up a local fast food place hours before the school day began. His father was part of a clutch of dudes who met there every day for coffee and conversation. That was how he had access to Julie's narrative. and he was passing that access on to me. He told me that after Julie's father had been deported, Julie had taken on jobs before and after school to support her remaining family members. Julie deserved better treatment than I was giving her. Maybe all of my students deserve a closer look to see if there might be ways I can ease their narratives instead of obstructing them. Maybe empathy can be more effective than shame at creating a narrative based on respect and equality, making room for the 23 hours a day they aren't in my class. The COVID-19 global pandemic interrupted all of our narratives this year and promises to shape our narratives for the foreseeable future. Distance learning created a new constellation of narratives that we're all struggling to come to grips with. For the first time in my teaching career, I didn't get to have the pleasure of watching my students access the entirety of that narrative. For the first time in my career, I am uncertain how to prepare for next year's narrative. Oh, and also, the fabric of our nation, you may have noticed, is being torn apart by competing narratives, catalyzed at least in part by an increasing awareness on the part of the nation that exists in so many cases above the fray of the narratives of those other Americans who have been all too aware of their differences and the role that playing in their narratives has been a part of for a very long time. Now we're tasked with keeping up with a narrative assembling itself faster than we can hope to understand it. A narrative unfolding in tears and chants, in blood and hope and fear. I don't know where or how we're going to do this. If anybody needs to be reminded that history is a messy, frequently contradictory process, just witness the history being created right now in our nation's streets, in our nation's hospitals, in the hearts of a national narrative that will pass into history. I know I'm going to need some help to get through this. Hopefully I can give some help to others who are also struggling to find their place in this historic time. I guess we're going to have to work together to help our students find their place in this interrupted narrative. Thank you very much.